Without a breeze to breathe life into the austere chamber. The great banners hung unmoving, some faded with years, others brightly woven, still others even bearing dried blood stains. Grimaldus looked upon the heraldry of his brother's crusades, lastrati, piles of skulls and burning braziers, depicting the war of attrition on the surface of that accursed heretic world. Apostasy, showing the Aquila chained to the globe, when the Templars were recalled to holy terror for the first time in thousands of years, to shed the blood of the false High Lord Vandere. And into the more recent wars in which Grimaldus himself had played a part. Vinculus, with the sword impaling a demon, where the knights had crashed against the tainted followers of the arch-enemy in the great battle of fire and blood. When Grimaldus himself had been taken from the ranks of the Sword Brethren and begun his grueling rise through the tears of the Chaplain Brotherhood, dozens of banners hung in the still air, descending from the ornately carved ceiling, telling the tales of the glories won and the lives lost in each single facet of the eternal crusade. The only noise, except for Grimaldus's own breathing, was the crackling hum of stasis fields enclosing Templar relics. Grimaldus passed one, a blurry field of smoky blue force, revealing through its milky surface a bolter that had once belonged to Castellan Duran 2,000 years before. The kill markings, scratched into the firearm surface, etched in the tiniest Gothic lettering, covered the entire weapon like Holy Scripture. Grimaldus stood by the plinth, displaying the bolter for some time, his fingers itching to enter the release code on the keypad. Built into the shield's column, such secrets were the purview of the Chaplain Brotherhood that maintained at this shrine. And even before he had risen to his current rank, Grimaldus had honored the machine spirits of the chamber's relics through ritual blessings and reconsecrations. There was a great succor in bearing the weapons of champions, even if only to cleanse and purify them after a warp jump. Only one of the planets. And in the Temple of Dawn, there were over 100 occupied displays for what Grimaldus had come for. He stood before the short column, reading the silver plaque beneath the pulsing stasis shield. Mordred, the Cruciarch, we are judged in life for the evil we destroy. Beneath the words was a keypad, each key bearing a Gothic sigil in gold leaf. Grimaldus entered the 19-digit code for this specific column, and the stasis field powered down with the grinding of ancient engines inside the stone plinth. Upon the flat surface of the white stone column, a weapon rested, deactivated and silent, freed of the blue illumination that had protected it. Without any ceremony at all, Grimaldus clutched the maul's haft and raised it in his sure grip. The head was a hammer of holy gold and blessed adamantium, fashioned into the shape of eagle wings over a stylized Templar cross. The haft was darkened metal, as long as the knight's own arm. The weapon's ornate head caught the dim glow from the lume globes ensconced in the walls, and was painted briefly in flashes of reflected light as he turned it in his hands. The warrior priest stood like this for some time. "Brother!" came a voice from behind. Grimaldus turned, instinct bringing the weapon to bear. Despite never holding the relic before, his scarred fingertips found the activation rune along its handle, Before his heart could even beat once, the eagle-winged hammerhead had flared with threatening brightness. Serpents of hissing electricity flickering over the gold and silver metal. The figure smiled to be revealed in such stark illumination. In a face pockmarked and creviced by decades of battle, Grimaldi saw the amusement in the younger knight's pale eyes. "Reclusiac!" The figure inclined his head in greeting. "Artarian, we draw near to our destination. Estimates put translation back into real space within the hour. I took the liberty of readying the squad for planetfall." Artarian's grin, much like Artarian himself, was ugly to look upon. In contrast, Grimaldi finally returned the smile, but as with his eyes, there was an unsuspected gentleness in the expression. "Throat will burn. Oh, wait. The world will burn," Warrior Priest said, not a shadow of doubt creeping into his voice. "It will not be the first." Artarian's scratched lips parted to reveal steel teeth. Implanted replacements due to a sniper shot 15 years before. The rifle round had taken him in the side of the face, shattering his jaw. The mess of scar tissue webbing the flesh around the left side of his lips added to the thin, sneering image he projected when his helm was removed. "It will not be the first," he said, "nor the last. Have you seen the projections? The fleet auguries? The number of vessels in the local systems? Already the reports of those yet to arrive. I lost interest when the numbers became too high for me to count on my fingers. I'm going to stop doing that, and I am sorry you had to hear that. I lost interest when the numbers became too high for me to count on my fingers." Artarian snorted at his own weak jest. "We will fight and win, or fight and die. All that ever changes is the color of the sky we fight under, and the shade of the blood on our blades." Grimaldi lowered the Crozius hammer, as if only then realizing he still held it at the ready. A rich darkness settled over their sight as the relic's crackling illumination faded. In the wake of the brightness, the sharp scent of ozone, that strange freshness after a storm, filled the air. The power cells within the mall half whined as they reluctantly cooled down. The weapon's spirit hungered for war. "You speak with a soldier's heart, but you are wrong to be so dismissive. This campaign, this has the weight of history about it. It would be the greatest of errors to consider this merely another conflict to add to the honor rolls." The softness had left Grimaldi's voice now when he spoke. It was with the bitter passion Artarian was all too familiar with, fierce and thick with anticipation. The growled challenge of a caged animal. "The surface of this world will burn until all of mankind's great achievements upon it are naught but ash and memory. I have never heard you claim we would lose before, brother." Grimaldi shook his head, his voice still low and fevered. "The planet will burn, regardless of our triumph or defeat. I speak of the coming crusades underpinning truth." "You are so certain?" "I feel it in my blood, win or lose," the chaplain said. Come the final day on Armageddon, those of us that will stand will realize no war has ever cost us so dearly." "Have you shared these concerns with the High Marshal?" Artarian scratched the back of his neck, his fingertips soothing the itching skin around a spinal socket. Their eldest chuckled, momentarily blindsided by his brother's naivety. You think he needs me to tell him? Few ships in the Imperium of Man match the lethal grandeur of the eternal Crusader. Some ships sailed the heavens like the sea-borne vessels of ancient terror, journeying between the stars. Hold on. Journeying between the stars with solemnity and a measured grace. The eternal Crusader was not one of these, like a spear hurled into the void by the hand of Rogel Dawn himself. The flagship of the Templars had been slicing through space for 10,000 years of war. Its engines raged, streaming plasma contrails in their wake as they powered the vessel from world to world, an echo of the Emperor's Great Crusade. And the Crusader was not alone. At her back, the capital vessels Knight's Vigil and Majesty burned their engines hard, striving to keep pace and fall into a lance formation with their flagship. In the wake of these heavy cruisers, a battle barge and smaller strike cruiser respectively, a wing of support frigates formed the rest of the lance. 7 in total, each of these faster interceptor vessels powered forward with less of a struggle to maintain formation with the Crusader. The ship burst back into reality, trailing discolored warp smog from its protesting galleyfield, the brilliance of its plasma drives flaring with gaseous leakage that misted around the void, the shields of the vessels which slammed back into real space just behind. Ahead of them lay an ashen globe, darkened by unclean cloud cover, strangely at peace despite the turmoil surrounding it. If one were to look into the void around the bitter, punished world of Armageddon, one would see a thriving subsector of imperial space, where even the most prosperous hive planets bore more than their fair share of slowly healing wounds. It was a region of space where the worlds themselves were scarred. War and the fear of another colossal sector-wide conflict hang over the trillions of loyal imperial souls like the threat of a storm forever on the edge of breaking. It was always said by some that the Imperium of Man was dying. These heretical voices spoke of mankind's endless wars against its manifold foes, and decreed that humanity's ultimate fate was being decided in the fires of a million battlefields across the countless stars within the God Emperor's grip. Nowhere were the words of these seers and prophets more evident than the ravaged, yet rebuilt, Armageddon subsector. Named for its greatest world, a world responsible for production and consumption on an immense and unmatched level. Armageddon itself stood as a bastion of imperial strength, churning out regiments of tanks from manufactories that never ceased activity by day or night. Millions of men and women wore the ochre armor of Armageddon's steel legions, their features hidden behind the traditional respirator masks of this honored and renowned division of the Imperial Guard. The hives of the defiant planet reached into the pollution-rich cover that wreathed the world in perpetual twilight. No wildlife howled on Armageddon. No beasts stalked their prey outside the ever-growing hive cities. The call of the wild was the rattle and clank of 10,000 ammunition manufactories that never halted production. The stalking of animals was the grinding of tank treads across the world's rock reach. Surfaces awaiting transport in the sky, into the sky to serve in 100 and more distant conflicts. It was a world devoted to war in every way imaginable, made bitter by the scars of the past, soured by the wounds that gouged into its face by humanity's enemies. Armageddon always rebuilt after each devastation, but it was never permitted to forget the first and foremost reminder of the last war. The almighty Second War that saw billions dead was a deep space installation, named for one of the Emperor's angels of death. Dante, they called it. It was from there that the mortals of Armageddon stared into the blackness of space, watching, waiting, praying that nothing stared back. For 57 years, those prayers had been answered, but no longer. Imperial tacticians already had reliable figures from early engagements that confirmed the Greenskin fleet bearing down on Armageddon as the largest Xenos invasion force in the system. Imperial reinforcements raced to break the blockade sectors and land their troops on Armageddon before the invasion fleet arrived. In the heavens above the doomed world, a battle barge of no standard design, the Crusader was a princely fortress monastery, charcoal black and bristling with Gothic cathedral spires like a beast's spines along its back. Weapons capable of pounding cities into dust. The claws of this night-stalking predator aimed into the void along the ship's length and clustered across its prow hundreds of weapons batteries and lance cannons stored with mouths open to the silent darkness of space. Aboard the ships are 1,000 warriors cast off shackles of training, preparation, and meditation. At last, after weeks of passage through the sea of souls, Armageddon beating heart world of the subsector was finally in sight. My brothers' names are Artarian, Priamus, Cador, Nerova, and Bastilan. These are the knights that have waged war beside me for decades. I watch them, each in turn, as we make ready for planetfall. Our arming chamber is a cell devoid of decoration, bare of sentence, alive now with methodical movements of dead-minded servitors, machining our armor into place. The chamber is thick with the scholarly scent of fresh vellum from our armor scrolls, coppery oils from our ritually cleansed weapons, and the ever-present cloying, salty reek of sweating servitors. I flex my arm, feeling my war plate's false muscles of cable and fiber buzz with smooth vibration of a cycle of motion. Papyrus scrolls are draped over the angles of my armor, their delicate runic lettering listing the details of battles I could never forget. This paper of good quality, by imperial standards, is manufactured on board the Crusader by serfs who pass the technique down generation to generation. Every role on the ship is vital. Every duty has its own honor. My tabard, the white of sun-bleached bone, often a stark contrast to the blacker-than-black plate beneath. The heraldry cross stands proud on my chest, where Astartes of lesser chapters wear the Emperor's aquila. We do not wear his symbol, we are his symbol. My fingers twitch as my gauntlet locks into place. That was not intentional. A nerve spasm, a pain response. An invasive but familiar coldness settles over my forearm as my gauntlet's neural linkage spike sinks into my wrist to bond with the bone and true muscles there. I make a fist with my hand, armored in black ceramite, then release it. Each finger flexes in turn, as if pulling a trigger, satisfied, its dead eyes flashing with an acknowledgement of a job complete. An arming servitor moves away to bring my second gauntlet. My brothers go through the same rituals of checking and rechecking. A curious sense of unease descends upon me, but I refuse to give it voice. I watch them now, because I believe this is the last time we will go through this ritual together. I will not be the only one to die upon Armageddon. Artarian, Priamus, Cador, Nerva, and Basila. We are the knights of Squad Grimaldus. Within his veins, Cador carries the blessed blood of Rogel Dawn with what seems like heavy honor. His face is shattered and his body tormented, now half bionic due to untreatable wounds, but he remains defiant, even indefatigable. He is older than I, older by far, his decades within the sword brethren. Wait, no, it's Cador, okay. He is older than I, older by far. His decades within the sword brethren are behind him now. He was released with all honor when his advancing age and increasing bionics left him less than the exemplar he had been before. Priamus is the rising sun to Cador's dusk. He is aware of his skills in the unsubtle and undignified way of many young warriors. Without even the ghost of humility, his roars of triumph on the battlefield sound like cries for attention, a braggart's declarations, a blade master, he calls himself, yet he is not mistaken. Artarian is Artarian, my shadow, just as I am his. It is rare among our number for any knight to lay aside personal glory. Yet Artarian is the one who carries my banner into battle. He has joked more times than I care to remember that he does so only to provide the enemy with a target lock on my location. For all his great courage, he is not a man blessed with a skillful sense of humor. The mangling wound that fouled his face was a sniper shot meant for me. I carry that knowledge with me, each time we go to war. Nerova is the newest among us. He holds the dubious honor of being the only knight I chose to stand with me, while all the others were appointed to fight by my side. The squad required the presence of an apothecary. In the trials, only Nerova impressed the rest of us with his quiet endurance. He labors now over his arm-mounted Narthekium. Blue eyes narrowed as he tests the flickering snap of surgical blades and cutting lasers. A sickening clack sounds as he fires his reductor. The giver of merciful death, the extractor of gene seed. Its impaling component snaps from its housing, then retracts with sinister slowness. Bastalon is last. Bastalon, always the best and least of us all. A leader, but not a commander. An inspiring presence, but not a strategist. Forever a sergeant, never fated to rise as a castellan or marshal. He had always said his role as such is all he desires. I pray he speaks the truth, for if he is deceiving us, he hides the lie well behind his dark eyes. He is the one who speaks to me now. What he says chills my blood. I have heard from Gariant and Logran of the Sword Brethren, he chooses his words carefully, that there is talk of the High Marshal nominating you to lead a crusade. No. The High Marshal is nominating you to lead a crusade. And for a moment, everyone stops moving. The skies over Armageddon were rich and thick with a thick greyish-yellow cast. Sulphurous cloud cover was nothing new to the population. With their hive walls treated and shielded against the storm season's downpours of acid rain around each hive city, across the planet's surface, vast landing fields were cleared, either hurriedly paved with rockcrete or simply ground flat under the treads of hundreds of landscape trucks. Around Haiti's hive, rain scythed down onto the cleared areas and sparked off the dense heat shimmer of the city's protective void shields. Across the world, the heavens were in turmoil, weather patterns ravaged by the atmospheric disturbance caused by countless ships breaking cloud cover every day. Yet at Haiti's hive, the storms were especially fierce. Hundreds of troop carriers, their paint already melted to reveal bare, dull metal in places, endured the rainfall as they rested in the landing field. Some were disgorging columns of men into the hastily erected composites that were spreading across the wastelands between the hives, while others sat in silence, awaiting clearance to return to orbit. Hades itself was little more than industrial scar tissue, blighting Armageddon's face, despite efforts to repair the city after the last war over half a century before. It still bore a ragged share of memories. Toppled spires, broken domes, shattered cathedrals. This was the skyline. After the death of a hive, a squadron of Thunderhawk gunships pierced the call of cloud cover. To those manning the battlements of Hades, they were a flock of crows winging down from the darkening sky. Mordecai, Riken, Ske, and the gunships through his binoculars. After several seconds of a zoom blur, green reticles locked onto the streaking of avian hulls and transcribed an analysis in dim white text alongside the image. Riken lowered the viewfinder scope. It hung on a leather cord around his neck, resting on the ochre jacket he wore as part of his uniform. His breath was hot on his face, recycled and filtered through the cheap breather mask he wore over his mouth and nose. The air still tasted like a latrine though, and it didn't exactly smell any better. The joys of high sulfur content in the atmosphere. Riken was still waiting for the day he would be used to it. And he'd been stuck on this rock so far for every day of his 37 years of life, away down the battlements, working on getting an anti-air turret operational, a team of his men clustered with a robed tech priest. The multi-barreled monstrosity dwarfed the half a dozen soldiers standing in its shadow. "Sir," one of them voxed. Riken knew who it was, despite the shapeless overcoats they all wore. Only one of them was female. "What is it, Vantine?" "Those are Astartes gunships, aren't they?" "Got eyes." And they were at that. Vantine would have made sniper a long time ago if she could aim worth a damn. Alas, there was more to sniping than just seeing. "Which ones?" she pressed. "Does it matter? Astartes are Astartes. Reinforcements are reinforcements." "Yes, but which ones?" "Black Templars." Riken took a breath, tonguing a sore cut on his lip as he watched the fleet of Thunderhawks touching down in the distance, hundreds of them. An Imperial Guard column rolled out from Hades to meet the newest arrivals, a command chimera flying no shortage of impressive flags, led 6 Lehman Russ battle tanks, their collective passage chewing into the newly laid rock reed. Bulky troop landers were still setting down elsewhere on the landing field, the wash from their engines blasting wind and gritty dust in all directions. But General Kurov of the Armageddon Steel Legion did not make personal appearances not to greet just anyone. Despite his advancing age, Kurov cut a straight-backed figure in his grimy uniform of ochre, fatigues and black webbing, with black padding on the torso. No sign of his many medals, not a hint of gold, silver ribbon, or the other trappings of pomp. Here was the man that had led the Council of Armageddon for decades, and earned the respect of his people by wading knee-deep in the sulfur marshes and bracken forests after the last war, hunting Xenos survivors in the infamous Orc Hunter platoons. He stomped down the ramp, setting his cap to guard his eyes against the heatless yet annoyingly bright afternoon sunlight. A team of guardsmen each as raggedly attired as their commanding officer, clanged down the ramp after the general. As they moved, misshapen skulls clacked and rattled together from where they hung on belts, and bandoliers across their chest. They gripped las guns that hadn't resembled standard issue sometime, each time its own display of modification. Each bore its own display of modifications and accountants. Kurov marched his ramshackle gang of bodyguards in decent parade order, yet without any conscious effort, he led them to the waiting Thunderhawks, each of which was still emitting a dull machine whine as their boosters cycled into inactivity. 18 gunships. Kurov knew that from the initial Auspex report as the Templars had landed. They sat now in disorganized, unmoving ranks, ramps withdrawn and bulkheads sealed. Their undersides, blunt noses, and wing edges still showed a glimmer of cooling heat shields with the after effects of planetfall. The 3 Astartes stood before the gunship fleet, still as statues with no evidence of which vessel they disembarked from. Only one wore a helm that stared through ruby eye lenses, its faceplate a skull of steel. "Are you Kurov?" one of the Astartes demanded. "I am," the general replied. It is my own. In unison, the 3 inhuman warriors drew their weapons. Kurov took an involuntary step back, not out of fear, but surprise. The knight's weapons were live in a humming chorus. Awakening power cells. Lightning controlled and rippling coated the killing edges of the 3 artifacts. The first was a giant clad in armor of bronze and gold against black. The surface of his warplate inscribed with retellings of his deeds in minuscule Gothic runes, as well as trinkets, trophies, and honor badges of red wax, seals, and papyrus strips. He clutched a 2-handed sword, its blade longer than Kurov was tall, and drove its point into the ground. The knight's face was shaped by the wars he had fought, square-jawed, scarred, blunt-featured, and expressionless. The second Astartes, clad in plainer black warplate, wore a cloak of dark weave and scarlet lining. His swords in no way matched the grandeur of the first knight's relic. But the long blade of darkened iron was no less lethal for its simplicity. This knight's face lacked the expressionless ease of the first. He fought not to sneer as he drove his own sword tip into the ground, and the knight who still wore his helm carried no blade. The rockery beneath their feet shivered slightly under the pounding of his war mace, thudding into the ground. The mace's head, a stylized knightly cross atop imperial eagle wings, flared in protest, lightning crackling as the metal kissed the ground. The 3 knights knelt, heads lowered. All of this happened at once, in the space of no more than 3 seconds. Since Kirov last spoke, "We are the Emperor's Knight," the giant in bronze and gold intoned. "We are the warriors of the Eternal Crusade and the sons of Rogel Dawn. I am helsreach, High Marshal of the Black Templars. With me is Bayard, Emperor's Champion, and Grimaldus, the Closiac." As they at their names, both knights nodded in turn. Helsreach continued, his voice a growled drawl. Helsreach continued, his voice a growled drawl. "Aboard our vessels, in orbit, are Marshals Ricard and Amalek. We come to offer you our blades, our service, and the lives of over 900 warriors in the defense of your world." Kirov stood in silence. 900 Astartes, entire star systems, were conquered with a fraction of that. He had greeted a dozen Astartes commanders in recent weeks, but few had brought such significant strength with them. "High Marshal," the general said at last, "there is a war council forming tonight. You and your warriors are welcome there." "It will be done," the High Marshal said. "I am glad to hear it," Kirov replied. "Welcome to Armageddon." Riken was not smiling. He'd been a lifelong believer in not shooting the messenger, but today that tradition was in danger of expiring. Behind him loomed an anti-air turret, blanketing them all in it. "Yeah? Yeah.